Hello, and welcome to the Narrowing Path, Walking the Spiritual Walk. My name is Steve Van Eiderstein, and thank you all for joining me today as we do the next beatitude reading from Emmet Fox's Sermon on the Mount. And it's been a great first four, I will say. I've really enjoyed the revisitation of these because in preparation for this, I usually reread it a couple of times. I take some notes. I prepare conceptually what I like to talk about with them because there's a lot that gets wrapped up into these. So this is going to be the fifth one tonight, which is Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. It's a rather short one comparatively to the other one, so we might not go for 45 minutes. Most likely not, I'm guessing, actually. So this will be a little bit shorter one for people to enjoy. And I do want to say thank you, everybody that tunes in and watches the videos on whichever platform that you do, whether it's here on YouTube or Spotify, or you listen to the audio on Apple Podcasts, and everyone that's followed me on YouTube and the Facebook page for this as well. So I posted a couple of James Allen quotes from a book called Light on Life's Difficulties. This is the first time that I've read it, and James Allen is somebody that's near and dear to my heart as an author. I believe he speaks a lot of truth. He wrote a lot of very good principled things, and this is the first time I've read Light on Life's Difficulties, and it's a fantastic, absolutely fantastic book to gain perspective on certain things. So I'd highly recommend it to anyone that wants some extra reading time. Each chapter is relatively short, or section relatively short, and you can just get a little bit of spirituality dosed in there and kind of move forward. So I am looking forward to it. So here we go. This is the copy that I read out of. This is from 1938, published in the United States, actually. And it is originally copyrighted in 1934. And I really try to get as close to the original as I can, like I say every time. So I'm looking forward to it. We've only read from this book from the second chapter, which was the Beatitudes portion. So we didn't do the first chapter, and I'm not planning to do the rest as of right now. The more I read this, though, and the more he talks about the next parts of this book, the more I'm considering doing another section of the book as well. But we'll see. We've got probably about a whole nother month. This should take us to the end of June. So, excuse me. So I'm looking forward to it. So let's get right to it. This is going to be, hold on, I gotta find my page. There we go. This is from Emmet Fox's book, Sermon on the Mount, the second chapter, the Beatitudes. And this beatitude is, Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. This is a brief summary of the law of life, which Jesus develops more fully later on in the sermon, Matthew 7, 1-5. As it stands, the Beatitude calls for very little comment, because the words employed bear the ordinary meaning which we shall give them in daily life, and the statement as given is as clear and obvious in its meaning as the law in question is simple and inflexible in its action. The point that the scientific Christian needs to note is that, as usual, the vital bearing of the principle covered in this beatitude lies in its application to the realm of thought. The thing that really matters is that you be merciful in your thought. Kind actions coupled with unkind thoughts are hypocrisy, dictated by fear or desire for self-glory, or some such motive. They are counterfeits, and they bless neither the giver nor the recipient. On the other hand, the true thought about fellow man blesses him spiritually, mentally, materially, and blesses you too. Let us be merciful in our mental judgments of our brother, for in truth we are all one. And the more deeply he seems to err, the more urgent is the need for us to help him with the right thought, and so make it easier for him to get free. You, because you understand the power of the spiritual idea, the Christ truth, Have a responsibility that others have not. See that you do not evade it. When his delinquency comes to your notice, when his delinquency comes to your notice, remember that the Christ in him is calling out for help to you who are enlightened. So be merciful. Because in deed and in truth, we are all one. Component parts of a living garment of God, you yourself will ultimately receive the same treatment that you mete out in others. You will receive the same merciful help in your own hour of need from those who are farther along the path than you are. Above all, it is true that in freeing others from the weight of your condemnation, you make it possible to absolve yourself from self-condemnation. And that's it. That's the whole reading, guys. And that, I know I say it regularly. It's not a new statement by me when I say that's a fantastic reading. I've come to realize that that's probably my most favorite saying and my most favorite description. It's because it's just there's so much that gets put into this thing. There's so much that gets actually developed. There's so much that gets actually brought into this principle. This is probably the shortest one we read. Honestly, this is I think the shortest one in this chapter, this beatitude. And he opens it up by saying, this is a brief summary of the law of life. Now, on the surface, the blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy, seems pretty straightforward and pretty singularly focused. And in its initial application, yes, it is. In its first take, at first reading, blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. It's pretty straightforward, like he says. Brief summary of the law of life, Jesus develops fully later in the sermon. And then he says, Matthew 7, 1-5, as it stands, beatitude calls for very little comment, because the words employed bear the ordinary meaning which we give them today in daily life. And the statement is given is clear and obvious in its meaning, and the long question is simple and inflexible in its action. So, pretty straightforward. But he goes into a little bit further, because that's what this whole thing's about. That's what all the Beatitudes are about. That's what Emmet Fox wrote this for, is to get the depth of understanding that is able to be extracted from these things. And he says this isn't just an action. There's so much more that goes into your actions and their effectiveness that we don't necessarily think about. Right? And I think it's very important that he pointed out, he called into the light the hypocrisy of many people. I have been one that has performed this type of hypocrisy, and I think that's probably, as much as I hold hope that it's not the same for everybody, it was the way it went for me. That I did my spiritual journey in the beginning, there was a lot of actions I was taking, but the thoughts didn't match. In the 12-step groups, they say, bring the body and the mind will follow. So it leads to a lot of conflict, because what you're thinking doesn't match with your actions. And the point of it is, take the actions first, and then in the spiritual context, in 12-step anyway, and that whole realm of recovery, is change your actions first so you can see the thinking behind it. James Allen talks a lot about that too. Self-control is step one. Actually begin to change your physical actions, and you'll see the thinking behind them, but you have to change the thinking behind them, or the outward change will always be temporary. Like, that's the key here. You can coax yourself and will yourself into an external change temporarily and to do the right thing for the wrong reasons. But that will only get you so far. And he goes so far as to say they are counterfeits and they will bless neither the giver nor the recipient. So if you're actually being merciful because that's what you're supposed to do, even though you're being judgmental in your mind, you want to you have your old way of thinking that is condemning and judgmental, but you're willing to practice a different way of living, so you take a different action. I do believe there's value in that to some extent, but if you're not willing to change the thinking, it is pointless, right? So he goes on and he talks about how we have to be congruent. We have to be authentic. We have to have integrity with our actions, really is what it is. We're talking about integrity right now. So to actually give and be merciful and have the thought be merciful as well, because the thing is, it's a lot less stressful and it takes a lot less energy to actually have the merciful thought, because the merciful action will naturally follow. If you have to change and put effort into changing the action because the thought is selfish and self-centered and egotistical, and then you have to purposely and intentionally do a different action than what you're thinking about, it's exhausting. It's tiring. It's overwhelming. So the real, how did he say it? The vital bearing of the principle covered in this beatitude lies in its application to the realm of thought. Which, like all of these, this is how we think. We're talking about the integrity of our character, our moral makeup, our virtuous actions, things, our righteous living, Christ-like ideal. This is the stuff that we talk about on this podcast. This is the stuff that we talk about in these books. Is what are we aiming for, right? And it's the soundness of mind and right-mindedness is what we look for, right? So we talk about hypocrisy here, and we talk about the alignment of our thoughts with our actions. And he says, and when we have those other thoughts, when our thoughts don't match our actions, we're purposefully, willfully changing our actions, regardless of what our thoughts are, right? They're dictated by fear or desire for self-glory, right? Self-centered fear or egotistical recognition and validation and acceptance, right? Pride are usually the main motivators. There's some differences that get pulled in. I'm sure there's some variance, but I do believe it's ego and fear. Self-centered ego, self-centered fear, which most would say is the same thing, drive the actions, right? If the thoughts are not of God, then it's of self, and that's never a good thing. And that usually tends to harm people more than we realize. So, and then he's go on to say that, on the other hand, true thought about fellow man blesses him spiritually, mentally, and materially, and blesses you too. So, like the healthy thinking, the God thinking, the righteous thinking, the Christ-like thinking, the however you want to put it, right-mindedness, in some spiritual circles will say it, following God's will. That's the common 12-step recovery method of stating these things. It all means the same thing, right? And when you have right thinking about this individual, when you have this principled thinking, virtuous thinking, then act will naturally follow, right? And you will bless them spiritually, mentally, and materially. And a side effect, see, this is the thing. A lot of people will have the wrong thought, take the right action because they know that's what they're supposed to do, because they want the reward from the action, right? So it's a self-serving motive that actually causes the presentedly right behavior. But again, it's only temporary and it's always selfish in that way. So when he's talking about here, and it blesses you too, the blessings for the right-mindedness, the blessings for the giver are actually acquired through side effect. They're a consequence of doing the right thing. And I think people need to understand that. Like the goal should never be the reward you get from doing the right thing. You do the reward in and of itself, or doing the right thing for the right reason because it's the right thing to do, is the completion of the process. Because the right thing doesn't always serve me, but I live by principle today. The right thing doesn't always feel good. I live by principle today, though, right? I have to keep that in line. So the extent of the process for me is right thing for the right reason because it's the right thing to do. And it ends there. I think of things in action and reasons for action rather than the resulting consequences that I hope to benefit from. Well, let me just say, I do that as much as I possibly can, which is quite a bit, thankfully. I do have my moments where, I want certain outcomes. I do have my moments where I try to control things. I'm not perfect, but I don't want to use that as a cop-out. What I am striving for is this in all of my affairs, this type of practice, to act only on principle, never on desired consequence. Because what I found is when you act on principle only, the best scenario will always result. It might be a little rough in the beginning, but eventually the details work themselves out. So this really talks about just authenticity. It talks about action and thought aligning and the integrity of that. And that's what we're having to strive for. Now, the overall concept here is one that James Allen talks about a lot, which a lot of authors talk about, which is referenced regularly in the Bible. And the entire book, As a Man Thinketh, was pretty much about it. I think it opened with it, at least. Is the principle is you reap what you sow, right? This last part here, because indeed and in truth we are all one, component parts of a living garment of God. You yourself ultimately will ultimately receive the same treatment that you mete out to others. Okay, that's reap what you sow, and it's phrased and presented with the concept of mercy involved, right? Which is one of the kindest, most loving things you can actually probably hold on to. It's one of the best principles to actually practice, I'm sure, in the grand scheme of things. But the entirety of the principle truly lies in the reap what you sow, right? And I love this last part. Above all, it is true that in freeing others from the weight of your condemnation, you make it possible to absolve yourself of self-condemnation, right? One thing I've learned in this whole journey for me is if I want to stop a certain style of thinking, if I want to stop beating, like, the negative self-talk, there's a lot of things about that today, and the depressive thinking, the negative thinking. If I wanted to stop all of that, I had to quit putting it onto other people, right? If I wanted to quit judging myself, I had to quit judging others, right? If I wanted to quit feeling angry at myself, I had to quit feeling angry at others, right? If I wanted to be loved and accepted, I had to start being loving and accepting of others, right? I had to start moving that through me. I had to start actually practicing that way of living, right? So what you put into the world will come back to you. I believe that fully and truly. And I have had to learn that the hard way, I think. It wasn't a singular realization, it was an understanding that came from many, many attempts at trying to heal and trying to just live better and live healthier and live in a more loving and peaceful way. And I really had to apply that understanding to everything I do. So every time I am condemning and judgmental of somebody else, I know there's something in me that's wrong. And if I feel like the world is bringing me painful things, or if the world is presenting in a painful way, then it is me that's putting it out into the world, and it's coming back to me. And I might not be able to change my immediate situation. I might not, because you can't sidestep the consequences of your thoughts and your actions. I don't believe they will always be there for you to reap. But I can start to put different into the world, and for that I'm grateful. So it's not flawlessly executed by any means, but this principle really has been a resounding win for me in some ways, and a resounding understanding that has provided me the ability to be free from a lot of my old self-judgments, a lot of my regrets, remorse, guilt, and shame. And through that freedom, I've been given the opportunity to live differently, to amend relationships, to participate in the world, and develop into a whole new man and individual. And I'm very grateful for that. So, all right. So there we go. That's it for today, guys. This is this is probably the shortest video one I've done. Actually, 22 minutes. So I hope y'all enjoy it, though. This is a big one. It's short, but that principle of reap what you sow in all areas, in all ways, remember that. Take a look at what you're getting, and you'll know what you're putting out there. It's kind of a painful truth to take to heart, but I believe it is the truth. And this beatitude is further evidence of that, I would say. So, but that's going to be all for tonight and this weekend. I will be back next weekend with the next beatitude, which is blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And that one, I'm excited about that one. I'm excited to reread this one and get some notes down about it, because it's blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. What a powerful statement. So anyway, either way, I appreciate y'all jumping on, and until next time, thanks.